Excellent. Okay. Hello, everyone. Well, none of you. This is good. Okay. Okay. Awesome. Now I'll just mute that. Awesome. And go over here. Okay, I should probably throw a link for you all down. Actually, Rosie, if you're already here, could you throw it? Because it's not giving me the same one. Yeah, to where the stream is going on. Thank you. So as far as YouTube's interface goes, that could have been worse, I'll be honest. It only completely failed on me a couple of times. So, in any case, don't mind the... There we are, awesome. Hello, hello, welcome. So, this is how I used to dress every day when I would do tours around the city of York. And you might, if you don't know York very well, I assume you don't, York is, in theory, the most haunted city in the most haunted county in the most haunted country in the world. And fortunately for you lot, I happen to, for quite a while over the past few years, work in the most haunted pub in that city. So, which I think fits into what we've got going on here quite nicely, because probably the first question you're going to ask me is, Jake, do you believe in ghosts? I'll answer that question in a little bit. Until then, let's give you a general overview of the sorts of things that you can expect from York and from the Golden Fleece and from anything really. Hello, welcome. So, I've got a little text document here that I have written right here. So, the first thing I want to talk to you about is really how different Yorkshire ghosts are. If you're used to ghost stories in terms of horror movies or in terms of horror movies or what certain people will tell you their experience being possessed by demons would be, then you probably have a picture of a ghost. It's not the same one that I've encountered. So for a bit of background, my name's Jake. I used to perform tours in the city of York. Mostly they were history-based, but occasionally they'd be ghost-based, so that's why we're here. And I approached, when I came to branch out into ghost stories, because they're far more profitable than telling people about the walls, unfortunately, I decided I was going to treat it like I would treat my history tour. Just simply because at that time I was a complete skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts even slightly. and my main reason for that was, well, if ghosts exist, shouldn't there be worm ghosts? Shouldn't there be dinosaur ghosts? Shouldn't there be ghosts of people who lived perfectly unremarkable lives? Why does it always have to be that wherever these ghosts are, there happens to be a good story to tell? And, without a doubt, a lot of people do use our thoughts about ghosts or the afterlife to try and scam you. So I didn't want to do that with my ghost stories. So what I did is I went into the archives of my city, which are freely open, well, they used to be before the pandemic hit. And I went through the archives about individual people's encounters. And if I found the same story more than 5 times from different people across a period of longer than 10 years, I included it. Because anyone can come to you and say, oh, last week a man with no head came and turned me upside down and flipped everything around. But that's not quite what I'd be interested in. So, for the purposes of tonight, this little hour and a bit, I'm going to tell you the stuff that I don't think can be explained in other ways. The stuff that people who have no connection to each other have routinely seen, and the sorts of things that people, and the sorts of experiences that might make for good reading, but might not necessarily be what you're expecting. So, welcome to York. So, to get an idea of why I call York the most haunted city, because that's it's a bit of a loaded claim. I will tell you this: York is, at my last estimate, it's over 1,300 years old. At least as it exists now. It existed before then, but records are very difficult to come into at that point. And York is a beautiful mix because it has been occupied by several different people, and it's been called many things, The Romans who founded it, they called it Iberacum. The Saxons who took over after they left, they called it Eofowish. The Vikings who raided and actually settled here first before anywhere else in England, they called it Jorvik. And Jorvik, well, when the French came, Jorvik, York. So there's a lot of history, and maybe someday I will tell you some of the terrible, terrible things that have happened historically in this city, but that's for another time. I'm going to tell you about ghosts, because it's about high time that I have an actual ghost in this stream. So, children. Children they're great. They're how we as a species survive. We are bred and we are brought up, and we are led to believe that they are the most beautiful things in the world. And depending on which faith you believe, children are either the purest form of humanity, or they need a bit of our guidance. That's not what I'm going to talk about. The other thing about children that tends to make people a bit unsettled is they're quite good at seeing things that aren't there. Now, if you've had any experience with children, you'll know that they, and sometimes they're making it up, sometimes they insist they're not, but it's not unusual for a child to be walking into a room and feel a presence or a energy that they're responding to. I think that's part of the reason why a lot of ghost stories that are out there revolve around children. So I'll tell you about a child ghost, and unfortunately, there's not a lot to say about him, as far as I can tell. So let me paint the setting for you. In one of my favourite streets in York, it's called the Shambles. If you have a Google, look it up. It's a beautiful 16th century street. It's beautifully preserved. Most people who look at it think about Diagon Alley from Harry Potter films. It was originally going to be filmed there. Well, there's only two things about the Shambles that you need to know right now. First off, it was a street full of butchers. It was a street, not very long street, but there were 36 individual butchers. And at one end, and it's on a slight curve. At the bottom of that curve is a pub. At the top of that curve is a bit of a town square. And during this period of about 1856, in that town square, the circus would come to town. Now, bear in mind, this is not the circus as we understand it. This is a Victorian circus, which tends to mean it might have been a bit crueler, a lot less acrobatics and maybe magic tricks, a little bit more of a freak show, shall we say. There were a couple of instances of unfortunate people getting recruited to these circuses and who basically lived in cages their whole lives. It's awful. However, we're not really here to talk about that. All you need to know for this story is that there is one of those circuses at the top of this street. In the middle of this street, there is a little child, little orphan boy. To the best of my research, his name was Thomas. It's hard to tell because an interesting fact about Thomas, I think he was deaf. And you might go, oh, Jake, where have you got this idea from? Well, Thomas was an orphan, and from what I can tell, he had nowhere to live. He lived on the streets. He was a street rat. And he made his living the way that you would when you're a youngster at that age. He stole, he made a living as best he could. He was a pickpocket, okay? He was a pickpocket. And the reason I think he's deaf is because there's a couple of instances where he gets caught and he gets questioned by the police at the time, and he just doesn't respond, and not as in a defiant way. It wouldn't have been him like refusing to speak. It's almost as if he can't hear them. Combine that with what I'm about to tell you next, I feel pretty certain in assuming that this boy was deaf. Anyway, on this particular date, he was in this street and he was playing in the gutter. From what I can tell, he'd managed to find either a rock or a little wooden horse that he was playing with, just in the gutter, just having fun. He was a kid. He was only about 11 at this time, and you know, the circus is up there, pub's down there. It's a very busy street, so people are wandering about him. However, the circus begins. The street empties a bit. That's why he feels safe to come out and play in the middle of it. And one of the acts in this circus that day was a horse. And you might think, well, Jake, that a horse isn't very spooky. A horse isn't very novel. It's not an attraction. Well, it's one of those horses that dances. I'm not sure. I think they call it dressage. It does a bit of a dance. And unfortunately, this particular day, the man who was supposed to be training him, or his usual handler, had fallen sick, and they brought in someone to replace him. This someone did not know how this particular horse had been trained, so to try and get him to start the performance, hit him with a whip, and the horse panicked. It leapt over the fence of the circus and began running. And as people tried to catch it, it got more and more frightened, and it tried to escape. It did escape. It escaped from them. It came around the corner and started galloping down this street, this little shambles street where this little boy was playing. And he wasn't looking at the horse, and most people were able to hear it. There was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of screaming, and a galloping horse is quite a loud thing, especially when it has shoes and the ground is cobbled. He has no reaction. Well, the horse doesn't stop moving. It goes through him. It tramples his head to the floor. He gets another hoof in his belly, and it continues on its way. And little Thomas died there, unfortunately. Except that's not the last time he's seen. So that pub at the bottom of this street, it's called the Golden Fleece. It's the most haunted pub in York. And I worked there for a long time. And while I worked there, I looked through their archives as well, and they have a pretty extensive collection of people's accounts of ghosts that they encounter, because the Golden Fleece is quite famous for being haunted. And supposedly, on the window of the pub that they rent out for rooms, that looks out onto that street, people outside the pub, people inside the pub frequently see the image of a young boy looking out over that street. And some people have offered a description, and the description that I managed to find was that he is crying. There are tears rolling down one side of his face. Why just one? Well, they don't roll down the other one because that's the side that the horse trampled. There's not enough face for the tears to roll down. Why do I know it's him? Because he started to be seen there within a week of him dying, and people identified that that's who it was, and they've since passed on, and he hasn't. He's still there. He gets seen to this day, generally about 2 or 3 times a year, you'll find someone encountering him. And he doesn't do a lot with that. He just stands there. Some people will report him crying, some people report him just looking there. He doesn't respond to you calling to him. He just stands there. So that's a warm-up to what you can expect in Yorkshire ghost stories. We're a bit sad. Of course, I can't talk about ghost stories in York without mentioning the most famous one there is. This is a much more recent one. It's from the 50s. So what was happening is a lot of the houses in York are repurposed. They've been built on many times. As I mentioned earlier, the city has been completely redeveloped several times. So it's understandable at least to me, that there are some things there that you can dig up. York frequently finds a lot of Roman artifacts and a lot of Viking artifacts, with people digging in the back gardens or any new renovation. So it doesn't surprise me that something like this happened, but I'll tell you the story itself. So, 1957, we have a gentleman by the name of Richard, who is a plumber, and he has been called into a house in the center of the city. And he's been called there because in this house, in the basement, there's a couple of leaky pipes up on the ceiling. It happens. So Richard goes into the cellar, the basement, gets a step ladder, goes up to where the pipe is, and he begins working on it. You know, he's twisting the valves, he's doing whatever it is that he needs to do. And he hears a clank of metal. A very specific clank of metal. He doesn't realize it yet, but it's the sound that plate metal that you would wear as armor. It's the sound that makes. Richard thinks it might just be the leaky pipes, you know. Sometimes air gets trapped in these pipes, and when you're releasing a bit of pressure, they tend to wipe. He doesn't think too much about it. So he's working away. The sound gets a little bit quieter, but it doesn't go away. It actually starts to move around the room. And the room gets cold. Heating might have gone off. Could be anything. And according to Richard, what happened next was he stopped. He turned his wrench on the pipes one final time, looked down at the bottom of his ladder to see where his tools were, and a figure came through the wall. A human figure. A human figure wearing armor. A very specific type of armor. Roman armor. Now I say he saw a figure. Apparently the only bit that he saw was from the torso up. Bit like what you can see from me now. This person came through the wall, took no notice of him, didn't seem to be interested in what was going on in the room or this other person who was there, just walked in a straight line that was on a diagonal of this room, out one wall and through the other. Richard panicked. He ran upstairs and told the owners of the house what had happened, and their response, surprisingly, was, "Yeah, that happens." Anyway, later on, that house gets a bit of demolishing. There's a little bit of works going on. Richard actually wrote a very detailed account of where in the room he went, and this figure, this Roman soldier who walked through the wall. And they knock this house down. They get to the basement. They knock through the wall, and they discover a street. An old street, an old forgotten street that had been built on top of. And the archaeologists come around, the historians come around, they have a look at this street. It's Roman. The architecture lines up. The structure itself, it's a Roman street. Coming from the back corner of this old basement to the other corner and continuing. And the reason I mentioned this particular story is because you doesn't matter when you visit York, quite often a lot of people will mention that they can hear clanking metal, or they can see a figure, or can kind of hear people coming in a direction, just a sound, like as if someone's talking and walking towards you and further away. There's a lot of stories that I could mention, but I think the best thing that I can do is tell you, firstly, the stories about the most famous ghosts in the Golden Fleece, that pub, and my experiences with them. So, the most famous ghost in the Golden Fleece Inn is Lady Alice Peckett, and she was a very wealthy woman. So we're talking about the 1720s here, and her family, the Pecketts, are incredibly wealthy. Like they're the sort of family who have their fingers in absolutely every corner of business going on in the city, like trade, rum, molasses, livestock, property. In fact, when the Golden Fleece was around during that time, the Pecketts closed it down by force and turned it into Alice's private house. And that's where she lived. In fact, she didn't just own that, she owned basically the entire street and that entire half of York. Now you might say, but Jake, this is 1700s. Women didn't own property. She's unusual. She did. Her husband was running for mayor of York at the time and had actually got the position, and it was policy that someone who is the mayor of a city can't own property there. So his wife owned it. And because of that, she became the wealthiest woman in the country. And she usually kept to herself. I think she thought she was quite a humane person, at least by the standards of the time. She was very outspoken in her views on equality of gender, equality of race, all sorts of things. And she was very keen on trying to reduce the homeless population in York and the orphan population in York. That's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm going to tell you about the night she died. So, the Golden Fleece in York has 3 floors. Ground floor, first floor, second floor. At the top of that second floor is a room that's still loaned out to this day. If you want to spend a night there in York, you can try. You can stay in her room, the room where she lived. If you ever do go in there, one of the things you will notice is there's a lot of mirrors there. That's not because she was vain and looking at herself. The mirrors are very important to this story. So, while Alice lived here, in this pub, she lived with one other person, and it was her maidservant. Her husband was away on business, so it was just the 2 of them in the house. And generally what would happen is Alice would do whatever it is that she needed to do, and the maidservant would make sure that everything was tidy, everything was clean, everything was where Alice needed it to be. And she lived in the house to make that easier on herself. And the way that this maidservant lived in the house, in fact, she literally lived directly below where Alice was staying. To the extent that if you wanted to get to Alice's room, you actually had to cut through this maidservant's quarters, which was basically a cupboard, but that's how it is with the with these things. So, this particular night, Lady Peckett's just finished her dinner. Maidservant's taken it, she's cleaned it, and she's getting ready for bed, And nothing appears to be out of the ordinary. Lady Peckett asks if she could not be disturbed for the rest of the night, which isn't unusual. She usually asks that at around about 9 o'clock. So this maidservant climbs into bed, falls asleep. And she's awoken a couple of hours later from some sounds coming from Lady Peckett's room. It's nothing too alarming. It's just the sound of someone talking. Just kind of talking, but obviously obscured by a wall. Now, this maidservant can be fairly certain that there's no one upstairs with her, because in order to get there, they'd have to basically walk past this maidservant, and she's a very light sleeper. She's fairly certain that there's no one up there. She didn't leave anyone up there. Lady Peckett can't be talking to anyone, but she is, and the maidservant listens for a bit, and it doesn't sound like Lady Peckett's in trouble. She doesn't sound distressed. So the maidservant decides, well, she might be talking in her sleep. She might be reading something out loud. I'd better not bother her. I'll go back to bed. So the maidservant goes back to bed. Following day, gets Lady Peckett's breakfast ready, puts it on a tray, walks up the stairs, opens the door, and finds Alice Peckett lying slumped at a little table that has a mirror in front of it. It was her piece of furniture. It was her favourite one, actually. She's slumped there. And obviously, maidservant panics. She calls the police, she calls a doctor. And from what I can gather, this is what they found. They found... There's no marks on Alice Peckett's body. She doesn't look like she's been in a struggle. There's no furniture that's been tipped over in the room. Everything's in its proper place. All the pictures are perfectly fine. None of the valuables have been stolen. Lady Peckett just appears to have passed away in the middle of the night. There is one unusual thing about the body. She'd been crying. And according to the maidservant, when she found her, there were still fresh tears rolling down her cheek. She's still seen here, in that room. Sometimes people see her crying. Usually she's accompanied by the smell of lavender. And she appears quite grey. Sometimes she'll appear spectrally, sometimes it's just a smell. She doesn't appear to have a specific thing, but those who claim they have seen her image claim that every time she's there, she's talking at a volume that you can't quite understand what it is she's saying. And if you try and ask her what she's saying, or go closer to find out, she'll just vanish. There is one person who claims to have figured out what she was saying. And there's quite a gap between Lady Peckett dying and him staying at the Fleece, because this man is named Jeff Monroe. He was a Canadian air pilot in World War II. And after the war finished in 1945, he went on a bit of a celebration tour, him and his friends, to visit all the countries that he'd helped to save during the war. England was one of them, and he booked that top room in the Golden Fleece for a week. He came in full of all sorts of transatlantic swagger. He was the bee's knees for the first couple of days. After a while, after a few nights, the pub staff start to get a bit concerned about him, just because he seems to be getting a lot less. He's being a lot less social with people. He seems quite content to sit in the corner and keep to himself. His eyes kind of sink into the back of his head. It looks like he stops sleeping and he stops eating. He doesn't leave the pub and he stops eating. Very important for the story, though, he never stops drinking. Keep that in mind. I've got to go and get something for this laptop so it doesn't die. I'll see you in a second. So, Jeff, the bar staff are concerned because if he's having a bad time, he might not encourage all of his friends to return. And, you know, we got to enjoy him. He was quite a nice fella. He drank a lot. He was quite boastful, but, you know, who wouldn't be? So eventually one of the members of staff on the bar asks Jeff if everything's okay. And he looks like he's not been sleeping. Jeff responds that, well, it's true, I've not been sleeping. Every night, as I'm about to fall asleep, there's this grey woman who shows up in my room and just whispers at me. And every time I try and get closer to try and find out what it is, she disappears. That's not unusual. We at the Fleece, we hear a lot of stories like that. What is unusual is that Lady Peckett keeps visiting Jeff several times a night, every time he's trying to sleep. We decide that there's not really much we can do to help him, so we keep pouring him his drinks. He keeps drinking them. And on the morning of the 5th day, the Fleece staff get up, they open the bar, and he's not there. Usually he's there as soon as the pub is open to start drinking. And he's not this morning. So they walk up the stairs and they just knock on the door, and they open the door just to double check that he's okay. And they discover that in the middle of the night, Jeff decided to leave out the 3rd floor window. 3 stories, head first, straight down. It was a hell of a mess. Most people assume it was an accident, and that's a fair assessment to make. As we know, he'd been drinking a lot, and one of the only things that were found in the room that was unusual was an empty whiskey bottle. And the official case states that he got too drunk and fell out the window. And that's what the Fleece will generally tell people if they ask about Jeff. But I found something else. In the archives, I found a few mentions that Jeff had left a note that for whatever reason the Fleece didn't give to the police. I kept looking, and I found it. And I'll be honest with you, most of that note does not make any sense. There seems to be like it's word salad, but there seems to be a lot of people, a lot of places, and a lot of names, most of which I think might be German. However, towards the bottom of this note, he gets a bit more legible. And he says that he saw her again, and he could finally understand what it was she was saying, this ghost, this Alice Peckett. She was saying the words, "I'm sorry," over and over and over again. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. At which point, according to this note, she looked at Jeff, at him, usually she didn't, pointed over his shoulder to where there was a little desktop mirror, and vanished. Jeff looked in the mirror, wrote down this note, and left. And I can't tell you what it is that he saw. All I can tell you is those people, places, and names and locations, and most of which are in Germany. I don't know what he saw, but I do know that, unfortunately for Jeff, he didn't really leave, because he's also seen in that room. Usually if people see Alice Peckett, they'll see Jeff. And what Jeff does is he'll start from where the bed is, he'll walk to the window and walk out of it. He'll then appear at the bed, get up, walk to the window, and get out of it. Over and over and over again. Now, when I worked at the Golden Fleece, I had a lot of experiences in that room. I had to clean it a few times. I had to go up to let people into the room, etc., etc. And I will tell you this, every time I went inside that room, I felt nauseous. And I didn't usually feel nauseous at that time in my life. The room kind of slumps to one side, and a lot of people who go in there tell me that it feels like you're being watched. So, I mentioned that I used to not believe in ghosts. Maybe I should tell you my experiences, because in that pub, I had a few. I once sent Rosie a picture of the inside of the Golden Fleece, actually. And from where I was sat, you could see kind of most of the front part of it. What I didn't tell her is that I was sat at a table where I had an experience. And I hesitate to say it was paranormal. However, I will admit that I have no explanation as to what happened. So, in this part of the Fleece, there is a bar at the back, and there's a bunch of tables around. And I was getting ready to shut up shop at that front bit of the bar, because they shut up that front bit of the pub to kind of discourage people from coming in when it gets to closing time. So I'm cleaning up. It's a Thursday in April. It's a Thursday in April, and it's 2018. And there's about 2 or 3 people in this area with me. And I'm just doing normal pub things. I've got a bit of kitchen roll and some spray, and I'm just wiping things down. Collect people's empty glasses, and I happen to notice at the back of the room, where one of the tables is back there, there's a chair that's untucked, and that's fine. That's normal. I don't really think much of it. But my hands are full, so as I go past, I reach out with my leg and just tuck it back in, and it immediately untucks itself again. Again, I don't really think too much about it. I just go, oh, okay, well, maybe I didn't do that properly, whatever. So I take all my stuff, put it at the bar, go back, grab hold of this chair, and with 2 hands, I tuck it back in, and I feel resistance. I let go, and it untucks itself. Maybe the floor is tilted in such a way that that's how it happens. You're right, it is tilted. It's not, but it's tilted forwards. If anything, the chair would want itself to be tucked in. To untuck itself would be to go uphill. One of the ghosts is supposed to sit there. A man called One-Eyed Jack, as we call him. So called. He was a redcoat soldier. He, from what I can gather, was quite a boisterous fellow, though. He would insult people, basically anyone who came in, if he didn't like you, and he basically didn't like anyone. Unfortunately, one day he insulted the wrong person. This person was also a soldier, challenged Jack to a duel, pistols at dawn. Jack went to the duel the following morning, was so drunk he forgot which holster his gun was in, got shot in the eye. And supposedly he's supposed to sit at that table, giving you the stink eye if you sit near him. Or in my case, untucking a chair. It's not the only thing I've had in terms of experience. There's 2 more I'd like to talk to you about. There's plenty more, but I'm aware we're running a little bit short on time, and I don't want to keep you too long. So I'll tell you these 2 stories. And bear in mind, these ones I did not look up. These ones happened to me, so I take them with a grain of salt. You should too. Do you remember that little boy? The first story I told you tonight. He's not just seen in that room that looks over the street that he died at. Depending on seemingly what mood he's in, he can be seen basically everywhere in the pub. If you see him, he'll generally keep to himself. But if you don't see him, he tends to be a bit mischievous. Very frequently, when I would be serving people, people would go, "Ooh, I've been someone's brushed up against me," or "Ooh, someone's touched my bum," or people feel like someone's trying to get their pockets. People get very protective of their possessions, and maybe that's just me reading it, but this kid used to be a pickpocket. Other things that he's been known to do, he's been known to take all of the paintings in a room and tilt them ever so slightly in opposite directions. He's been known to take a chair, if we move it to somewhere he doesn't like, and move it back to where he wants it to. Doesn't matter what the room's new configuration is. If it's not to his standards, he'll just move it back. And supposedly he kept his home in that front bar where I used to work a lot in the Fleece. And you probably will never, you might not ever go there, but as I sit here, imagine that I've got a bar table here. I'm stood on this side, everyone else is on the other side. So here's the table, here's all the bits that you use to pull the drinks. Behind me there's some spirits, there's some glasses on some shelves over here, and there's a shelf at my head height where they keep crisps and stuff. And over there, as I stand, if I'm facing this way, actually, if I'm facing this way, here, supposedly that little boy would like to sit. His feet dangling over the edge, just kind of doing that. Some people saw that. I never saw that. What I did see was on that shelf, as you were... For our sake, you would have these tankards that were mostly decorative, and we'd have them hung up by the handle. And the one closest to where his legs are supposed to be would always be swinging. And I mentioned actually that as I'm here, this is where he's supposed to be. Right here is a little shelf of glasses. Part of the job there is you have to make sure the glasses are clean. And, obviously part of that is stacking them. And very, very strange thing happened, like very shortly before I left, actually. In fact, I think I'd handed in my notice that I was going to be leaving. This was not an alone thing. Several people were there. In fact, it was quite busy. It was a Saturday night. I was pouring someone a pint. It was a pint of Camden Hells. You won't know what that is, but it's a lager here. And as I'm pouring this pint, I feel something strike the side of my head. And I get a bit dazed for a second. I blink, I kind of look down and there's broken glass in this drink, so I go, oh, I should probably fix that. And yeah, it looks like a glass has fallen from one of those shelves. I don't really take much thought to it. I clean it up, clean myself up, pour this guy a new pint, carry on. Anyway, as the night carries on, I realize that if the glass was here, which the one that broke was, I was stood here. I'm not saying it couldn't have fallen, but it seems unlikely. So anyway, I have a look at the security footage just to sate my own curiosity, and well, this is what I see happen. Glass is sat there, I'm over here, and it moves, drops, stays for a second, then collides with the side of my head. And I have no explanation for that. So I have to think that there's something going on in that pub. Maybe there are ghosts, maybe there are the undead there, maybe there's some strange gas that's coming from the earth that we all smell and we all have a collective hallucination. Maybe it's to do with the earth's magnetic pole. I don't know what, but something is going on there. Last thing I'll tell you. This time last year, I held an event in that pub. It was after I'd already left, but I dressed up in this very outfit. I went up into their function room and I told ghost stories, these ghost stories to them. And behind me were these big mirrors. And every night, something happened with those mirrors. On the first night, one of them completely fogged up. I don't know enough about room moisture or whatever to know what was going on there, but the people who were in the room with me who did believe in ghosts thought that it was a clear sign. On the second night, a medium came, so that a psychic medium who does this for a living, and she came up to me after the show and said, at several points during your stories, I could feel something else was in the room with you specifically, with me. And on the third night, which was Halloween itself, so exactly a year ago, actually, while I was telling people about the little boy, behind me, this giant mirror, there was a flash of movement. It lasted less than a second, but like a few people saw it. And I turned around and I had a look in there. I didn't see anything, but apparently flash of movement behind me. That's not my first encounter with flashes of movement. I've lied to you. I'm going to tell you one extra story that's to do with me. If you know about Merlin Entertainments, you probably don't, but they're a big corporation that's to do with, they have a lot of attractions in this country, and I think there's a few over the States as well. And I worked for them in 2015 for a little bit. And I worked in York at a place called the York Dungeons. And basically what that is it's a cross between a haunted house and what I'm doing now is basically you'd have actors dressed up in stuff and they would tell you creepy stories and animatronics would jump out at you. It's a fun time if you're ever there. Anyway, one of the parts of that attraction is when you get to the depths of the dungeons, which used to be a women's prison, by the way. When you get to the depths of there, the actor there will be dressed like a monk and he will put you in a mirror maze, basically. It's a maze of mirrors. You have to find your way through, and there's holograms, there's projections of ghosts, and all sorts of spooky stuff happens there. Anyway, that's what I was doing. I was put there on a close, which basically means you're the last person there. And I get my last group through, put them over to the next actor, and begin to shut down. And part of the process for shutting down that particular attraction is you open the maze up from both ends, and you just walk through it to double check that no one's got lost in there. And obviously I knew the route off by heart, and I turned all the lights off, so literally all I had to do was go and I'd be out. And I'm halfway through this maze when at about my hip height I see a flash of movement. And I don't really think anything about it. I go, oh well, we must have rats or something, because it's an old building. So it spooked me a bit. It was a bit of a jump, but I didn't think it was a ghost or anything. Anyway, I shut up shop there, went up to the changing rooms where all the actors were, and I just happened to mention, I had a bit of a flash of movement there, had a bit of a jump, and I just kind of chuckle about it because I'm like, stupid me. And a few of my fellow actors kind of look at each other and go, "Oh, you've seen him then?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And apparently, while this place was a women's prison, if the prisoner was pregnant, they were allowed to keep the child with them while they tried to find it an accommodation. And in the 1800s, this particular part of the prison flooded because it's right next to the river in York, which floods if you spit in it. And that this particular boy was never recovered. And supposedly, where I was at that point is the most haunted room in there. And I had encountered the little drowned boy. So I think between all of that, either I'm a magnet for ghosts or they just like me. So hopefully I've given you a bit of fun to work with. I know plenty more ghost stories. I can rattle a couple of them off. There's Mad Alice, who confessed to crimes that she didn't do and was executed as a result. There's James Reed, a Scotsman who we hanged, drawn and quartered for playing the bagpipes during a battle. He's still here, playing the bagpipes. There's the poor guy called Marmaduke Buckle. Marmaduke Buckle lived here in the 17th century, and he was quite deformed. I think his arm, his back, and his leg were all twisted. And he was quite, and times being what they were, they accused him of being a witch frequently. And, he spent most of his life in a house on Goodrum Gate, which is now a restaurant. And he took a blade one night. He could finally take it no more, and he carved his initials. The year 1697, which is the year he was born, and 1715, today's date, on a beam. Got a rope and hung himself from that beam. And his ghost is still supposed to be there. He has something in common with the little boy in the Golden Fleece, actually, in that they will both push you upstairs. Up. Like you're not going fast enough for them. So that's enough for tonight, I think. Hopefully this has been entertaining for you. If you would like me to do more ghost stories in the future, then please feel free to ask me. If you've seen anything yourself, let me know. People used to come up to me a lot last year and talk to me about their own experiences or where I found all these stories. But I think the main thing I want to leave you with is don't stop telling stories. Whether they're ghost stories, history stories, or your own stuff, don't stop telling them. Share the stories if they're your own, if they're from someone else. Go out and share them. Because it makes us better. And a universe without stories to tell sounds like a lot of empty space to me. Thank you very much. And until next time, I will see you later.